Started. We'll go ahead and begin the recording. Thank you, everybody, for attending the SR 520 Portage Bay Bridge and Roanoke Lid Project's December monthly construction meeting. I see some familiar faces here and a lot of new faces at today's meeting, so welcome to you all. We are scheduled to go until 1 p.m., though we have a lot of information to cover, so if we need to go past 1 p.m. by a couple of minutes, we're happy to stay on, answer any questions that you may have. And we'll either answer them during this meeting or we may follow up with some folks via email. Before I pass it over to my colleague Robin, I'll go through a couple of housekeeping items. And I'll also start with a couple of quick introductions and then an overview of today's meeting. First off, my name is Alan Van, and I am the Public Information Manager for the Skanska team. Today, you'll be hearing from myself and my colleague, Robin Clark, who is Skanska's Community Liaison. We also have several other Skanska team members that are also on the call, who you may also hear from throughout the presentation. On your screen, you could see that we also have some webinar support. You may see those names listed on the panelist or attendee side as well. If there are any tech issues that you may be experiencing, send them a direct message, or we also have our 24-hour hotline as well right next to us. To the right of the screen, we also have some useful resources for you, including our project email address, where to find meeting recordings, and how to sign up for email updates. So make sure you scan that QR code. It will bring you to our Gov Delivery sign up, and you'll be able to select which email list you will be added to. And again, we'll be sending out weekly reminders about construction and then also notifying folks when the meeting recording is posted. Next slide, please. And then before I pass it over to Robin, I'd like to remind folks about how to participate in today's meeting. So as we are presenting information for you, please make sure that you submit your questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Some questions may require us to follow up with you via email, so please make sure that you've also registered for today's meeting. If you haven't registered for today's meeting, we may not have your email on file, so we may request that you send an email to the project inbox with your questions. And then that also gives you an opportunity, if you have any questions that come up later, you can always just send us an email. As a reminder, all questions will be visible to all attendees. So keep that in mind when you're submitting your question. Try to limit any sort of personal information that you don't want out there for the public to see in that Q&A. So just make sure that you're being mindful of the information that you're sharing. We will plan to answer some of the questions as we are going through the content of the presentation, though some we may hold until the very end of the presentation as well. And then, as I mentioned, we may also be following up with folks via email. Our goal is to end around 1 p.m., but as I mentioned earlier, we may be able to stay on a couple of minutes extra if the Q&A goes long. And without further ado, I'll dive into the agenda, and then I'll pass it over to Robin. Next slide, please. So for the agenda for today's meeting, so Robin will cover the project schedule, discuss the current construction activities throughout your neighborhoods, share some updates on some upcoming construction, and also give a preview of the work that is being planned. So with the agenda out of the way, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Robin.
All right. Thank you, Alan. Hopefully folks can hear me okay. If not, please let us know. So like Alan mentioned, I am Robin Clark. I am a project engineer and the community liaison with Skanska for the SR 520 Portage Bay Replacement Bridge and Roanoke. Oh, I buggered that one up again. Man, I'm going to have to work on this one. I think this is the third time I've done that. SR 520 Bridge Replacement, Portage Bay Bridge and Roanoke Lid Project. One of these days I'll get it. Anyways, thank you guys for joining us today, especially our new folks here. For those of you returning, I'm going to go through some repetitive information from meetings past, just in the interest of giving new folks kind of an orientation of where we're at on our project and in the progress. And we'll get into some updates on our schedule, our construction progress overall, and give you guys some information. And of course, as Alan mentioned, we will take all of your questions and answer them to the best of our ability. If there's anything that we can't answer or we end up not having time for, we will follow up with you guys after the meeting via email. Sometimes we run into questions that might require a bit of research on my end if I don't know it on the spot, but we always do try to follow up with you guys. So with that, I'll get started. So on the screen here, you guys are seeing our project map. This is just the big picture overview of our project. On the west side or the left side of the project overview, you guys can see the orange and yellow. This is going to be our new Roanoke lid connection for the north and south side of Seattle, connecting the neighborhoods across 520. We'll be constructing that and connecting those neighborhoods via the 10th and Delmar roadways. We'll be also connecting the new Portage Bay bridges by replacing the existing SR 520 bridges. And we'll be connecting the yellow new pedestrian and bike connections with the SR 520 trail with the Montlake interchange that you guys have been watching the construction going on for a little while now, and the I-5 connection, which again is wrapping up their construction. What that looks like for our schedule. So our project schedule for building those new bridges and building the lid and bike connections and pedestrian connections. We have started our construction here in 2024, and we'll be running our construction through about 2031. So the bulk of our activities are in this 2025 to 2030 season. Right now, our major activities are going to be the Portage Bay Bridge North construction, the removal of the existing SR 520 bridges, the Portage Bay Bridge South construction, the lid construction, landscaping and urban aesthetics, and just an emphasis on our pile driving seasons. And we'll continue to update the schedule and get a little bit more dialed in as these monthly construction meetings go on. But that's kind of the big picture highlights there. For our Portage Bay Bridge North construction, this includes what you guys are probably seeing out on Portage Bay right now, which is our work bridges. And I'll get a little bit more into that here in the coming slides. We've started that construction here in Q4 of 2024, and that work will be continuing through 2027 with us rolling into the removal of the existing bridge, followed by the construction of the South Bridge. Then in 2025, early stages, we'll start on the lid construction with some of our utility work, and the major lid work will start in 2026 and roll all the way through 2029. With our landscaping and urban aesthetics starting in 2027 and rolling towards the end of the project. One thing I want to mention, and that we'll continue to talk about through this presentation, is our pile driving seasons. So we have in-water pile driving seasons that you guys have probably been experiencing with our in-water work. That's our cranes that are on barges right now, adjacent to the existing SR 520 roadways and bridges. That's building our work bridges along our existing bridges, and we're allowed to pile drive in water from a certain season, September to April. Outside of those seasons, we're allowed to do vibratory work, but we won't be pile driving in water. We are allowed to do some pile driving on land, but we won't be doing any pile driving in the water from the outside of that season, April to September. We do have 5 seasons planned, but I will get into a little more detail on that in the coming slides. So our current construction activities for December, we are continuing our impact pile driving for Portage Bay. Our work bridges, like I mentioned, are on the north and south side of the existing 520 bridge. These are helping us facilitate eventually what we'll do to construct the new Portage Bay bridges and remove the existing SR 520 bridges. So we'll continue pile driving and building out those work bridges, and then we'll continue bringing our material in via barges from our yard off-site. And then kind of an upcoming look ahead for the next 3-ish months, January into February, March. We'll continue with our barge work and our pile driving, working our way out on the work trestle, work bridges. We'll begin some of our tree and vegetation removal in probably about February of 2025. We'll continue following that with some utility work. We'll begin some short-term build-offs and trail closures. We'll begin our acoustic fence installation. And again, we'll continue our impact pile driving. And just kind of again, a reminder that our impact pile driving season will end at the end of April of 2025. So our impact pile driving will end at that time for in-water work. We may have some land-based pile driving after that, but it won't be as much as what you're experiencing throughout this season. So throughout the bigger picture of next year, all the way into the end of 2025, we will continue, again, our work trestle construction. We'll finalize some of our design for the Roanoke lid and temporary overpass, which I'll get into towards the end of our presentation here. I will talk a little bit through some of the detours that we have planned for that as well. And I apologize, there's a little bit of a capitalization there. Continue refining detours for people walking, rolling, or biking. Specify trail or lid. Interesting. We have some edits to do on our slide here. So we have throughout 2025 some utility work, temporary overpass work, and some build-offs and trail closures coming up, as well as some traffic impacts that I'll walk you guys through throughout the next year. All right, getting into some of the current work details. So talking through our current construction details, with the pile driving, we also have our north heading and our south heading that I will talk through. We have 2 cranes out there right now, and we're looking to bring a third towards the end of this month. That third heading, we call it, or a third crane, is going to start on that south side or the bottom side of what you see on the screen right now. Right now, both of those locations are moving towards the west or towards the left, and they'll continue building out those work bridges. Once that third crane or third heading shows up, those 2 cranes will work opposite of each other towards the land. Also, current construction activities I'll talk through are the SDOT curb ramp sidewalk work that are ongoing. Not much that we have with our activities to do with that construction, but it is something that we are actively coordinating with them just to make sure that our activities don't overlap with their work. So getting into the details of pile driving, again, we have our work trestle or work bridge. I use that a little bit interchangeably there. So what you see in the picture right here, highlighted in green, is what you see for our work bridge. This is going to allow us to bring our construction material, equipment, personnel onto the temporary platforms so we can construct and remove all of the infrastructure needed to build our project over the water. To do that, we have to install piles as the foundations for the temporary bridge. There will be around 700 piles. I think it's around 710-ish, a little bit over 700 piles over the lifetime of the project, with the bulk of those piles being installed this first season. In fact, I think our goal is 379 that we are trying to get installed for this first season. That's our goal. As the piles are installed and as those orange stars are working in their respective directions, the crews also build out the platforms, so they kind of work in that systematic process. And so as you guys kind of experience the pile driving process, there might be days or periods of time where you don't experience a consistent pile driving, and that might be because they've stopped to work on some of that platform build out. So in December, our current progress is in those 2 locations. We typically install between 2 and 8 piles a day. And we've worked in those 2 green sections there that you see on the screen. And we'll continue to uptick on our progress as we get a little bit more streamlined in our system, and especially as we get that 3rd crane into its location and get them started. There's a couple different reasons that we kind of see that progress start to flow a lot better throughout the start of construction and progression of construction. So one of those reasons is testing and establishing baselines. We have some underwater noise monitoring that we do at the start of construction. That takes a little bit of time to establish that baseline, get the system worked out, get some of our challenges figured out from the start of monitoring to actually getting into the rhythm of construction and the rhythm of pile driving. So once that gets worked out, we're able to find that rhythm, maintain a really good system, and keep going and pick up our progress. Another thing that we kind of work through is just figuring out the consistency with our crews, getting them to work together in a new location, new job, new rules and regulations. Once they figure out their flow, it goes a lot faster. And so our progress to date has been 32 piles. Again, our goal is 379. And out of the 5 seasons that we have planned, this will be that larger season. The other seasons we have planned, the next 2 will include pile driving, and the latter 2 will be more so pile removal as we get kind of towards the construction and eventually removal of the existing bridge. And I'm going to pause real quick for a question.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. I just want to acknowledge that we have a couple of questions in the queue. I think for some of these, we may answer towards the end of the presentation or as we get closer to the content. But for one of the questions that we can answer now as we are talking about the work bridge and pile driving, Greg has a question that I'll read from the chat. Will ingress and egress for boats in South Portage Bay be around the east or west ends of the work bridges, or will the work bridges be high enough somewhere for the boats to cross underneath?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's a little bit of a combined answer. On both the north and south work bridge, we will have connections to the east and west sides of the project. We'll have a connection on the east side via Montlake Boulevard and via the SR 520 off-ramp. So we will have some traffic ingress, egress for our equipment and material as needed there. On the west side, we will have a connection to Boyer Avenue. So we will have a little bit of ingress, egress on that side. But we will also still have ingress, egress via our barges. So we can bring a lot of our equipment and material via the water. Another element of that, just for the boater side and for usability, between what you can see on the screen, Piers 5 and 6, we have height clearance so that we can maintain 24/7 access for boaters. So we'll always have boater clearance access for anybody that's using that area.
Great, thank you, Robin. I believe this question from Murray is related to that. When will rebar installation work? I'm assuming that is for the work bridge.
That one would actually be for the main construction of the bridge. So we won't have any rebar on the work bridges because the work bridges are constructed of temporary steel casings that we're installing right now. And then the platforms are made primarily of timber and other temporary materials that we'll take out at the end of our project. The rebar itself is going to be encased with concrete on our permanent infrastructure with the north and south Portage Bay bridges. Those will begin in probably middle 2025, summer of next year. We'll start working on some of those foundations, maybe late next year. I'll have to double check on that. Maybe that's probably worth a follow-up on my end, Alan, just to take a note on that to check on the schedule. But I believe we'll start on those foundations mid to late next year. But the primary operation will go throughout 2026 on working through the north bridge construction and bringing rebar in and out.
Great. Thank you, Robin. And I also just want to acknowledge a couple of other questions that we will be answering later. So we have 2 questions from an anonymous attendee about vegetation removal, and then the short-term Bill Dawson trail closures, which we have content for later in the presentation. So we'll make sure to address that when we're at that section. And then we also want to acknowledge a question from Greg regarding the Beaver Lodge in Portage Bay as well. We'll hold that one to the end of the presentation. But I think we can move forward with the rest of the content. Thank you, Robin.
Great. Awesome. All right. With that, I do want to go into a little bit more with the seasons, and then we'll move on to some more content with construction. So the last little bit of impact pile driving, again, I mentioned our seasons, just continuing to talk through that. We have September through April. Our work schedule is that we're going to continue working Mondays through Saturdays, 6 days a week. Our typical hours are Monday through Friday, 7 to 10, Saturdays, 9 to 10. And we do have some Sundays planned probably later in our season, but right now we are not working Sundays. And again, we will have some pile driving on land later in the year planned in that summer timeframe, but it will be significantly less than what we are conducting right now. And then vibratory pile driving. So we do have vibratory pile driving, and the difference is that it's just vibrating those steel casings into the ground rather than hitting them into the ground and making that loud impact noise. That occurs year round, so we'll be continuing that work. Kind of the difference between those 2 activities, and one of the challenges that can sometimes slow down our work, is that the ground conditions underwater in the bay, if we hit some issues or challenges with the soils and ground conditions and we can't vibrate the steel casings into a certain area, then we have to use that impact pile driving to get them through those conditions. But there are areas where we can maximize our use of vibratory pile driving, and we try to do so. So those areas will continue to do vibratory driving throughout the year. All right, enough about pile driving. So onto trees and vegetation removal. So previously in some of our monthly meetings, for those of you returning, we had some schedule updates where we were originally starting on the Boyer Hill side. We have swapped a little bit of that, and we are scheduled next year to start on the Montlake side over near the Bill Dawson Trail. I will work through and talk you guys through a little bit of why that is, but just as an overall highlight, this is what we are looking at for tree and vegetation removal schedule on our project and the general limit. We're expecting to start that work in early February of next year. Again, on that Montlake side in that red zone that you're looking at on the screen. We do have tree removal notices. For those of you that have been out on the Boyer Hill side, you may have seen those, either yellow or lime green. There's yellow ones that say if we're going to be removing the tree, and there's lime green ones if they say we're going to be protecting them. And I say that because in those red and orange zones that you see on that map, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're removing every single tree in that area. We do have certain trees that we're removing, but some of the trees in the area we may be protecting. We just want to note that area because it is our project limit. So we'll start in that Montlake side, and then we'll flop back over to the west side of the project, the left-hand side, back to the Boyer Hillside area in April of 2025. And we'll keep going west into that East Roanoke Street area in May of 2025. And then in the orange areas, we'll continue to schedule that following May of 2025 and kind of periodically schedule that throughout the rest of the year. And we'll continue to update you guys as we schedule those activities throughout the year. So touching base on the updated tree removal schedule and why we kind of did that, we had some updates just on our utility side. And in talking with our utility team, we wanted to make sure that we were not removing trees too early, primarily from an environmental standpoint, and making sure that we weren't removing trees and just exposing the hillside during especially winter and the rainy season. We know how rainy it gets here in Seattle, and trying to maintain potential erosion issues throughout the winter. So what we elected to do was wait until spring and make sure that we were removing trees a lot closer to the start of our utility work, so that we are basically removing the trees and then getting our operation in there to start our utility relocations. I'll touch base on the utility relocations here in a minute, but for sake of context, that's why our schedule has changed in that regard. I'm going to pause for a question real quick.
Yeah, just one comment and then one question from the Q&A. I received some messages that folks, the attendees, aren't able to see the questions in the Q&A. Sorry, we will go ahead and look into the visibility to make sure you folks know what other folks are asking in the Q&A. I will be reading out all of the questions as they come up, and as we are planning to answer them as well. So if you have submitted a question and you're wondering where it is, don't worry. We are tracking it on our end, and we'll either respond live during this meeting or we'll follow up via email. That being said, we did have one question regarding the tree and vegetation removal. So we had an anonymous user submit a question. What does vegetation removal specifically mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. So vegetation removal is basically anything from trees down to ground level. It can include shrubbery, bushes, debris from trees and shrubs, grass, really any types of vegetation in the area. We identify trees specifically outside of vegetation because there is a different notification process for that. And we placard trees that are 2 inches and greater to notify people, notify WashDOT of their removal. Versus vegetation, we don't typically notify the shrubbery. We just notify you guys through these schedule updates and through our communication and outreach to you guys of shrubbery and vegetation removal. And then that is like clearing basically an area all the way down to topsoil and the ground level, essentially.
Great, thank you, Robin. We did have a follow-up question from that person. You have the technology to preserve the trees remaining. Why would you remove them? Large trees cannot be replaced. You should not remove the remaining large trees that are healthy. What is the plan for replacing those trees? Yeah,
also a really good question. We are actively trying to protect as many trees as we can. Unfortunately, there are areas where there are trees conflicting with the infrastructure that we're trying to build, such as some of the areas that you see on the screen now. They conflict with things like our utility relocations, our new bridge infrastructure, and it's just not possible, unfortunately, for us to keep those trees in place and healthy and still be able to build the new infrastructure. We do have plans to replace and restore all of these areas at the end of the day, and part of our construction process and our design process is that we have an entire landscaping and restoration design package that we are in progress of putting together with our designers. And we have a calculation of tree replacement that we work with our designers on, and we work with WashDOT and the city on to make sure that we are adequately replacing all of these trees. It's not quite the same as putting the exact same tree that was there in the first place, because we can't, unfortunately, put the same aged tree that we take out and plant it back. But we can place new trees and help them grow and thrive in these new places. So we do have those replacements planned towards the later part of our project.
Great. Thank you, Robin. We do have a couple of additional trees. I know that trees are a very important topic for the community, so keep those questions coming in. I think we'll just answer the two that we have right now in chat, and then we do have some other content that we need to get through for the presentation, so we may hold some of the questions to the end. But for one of the questions, what is the plan to keep the remaining trees? I think that's up to interpretation for how to respond to it. Maybe it's if the person who submitted that question, if you could maybe provide some clarifying details, but I'll let Robin attempt to answer that.
Yeah, definitely might need a little more clarification. I'm assuming the keep or protect remaining trees that we're keeping in place. For the trees that we're protecting, we do have an arborist that we work with to help identify and provide protection measures. So we find all of those trees, we identify them, we placard them with the protection notices, and then we fence them off with neon orange construction fencing, so that during our construction process, there's no confusion from any of our crews or subcontractors that those trees are going to stay protected and not be removed. We also have some trees where there might be a concern with like their critical root zone. And again, we work with our arborist to determine what level of impact there is with the critical root zone, whether it's just on the edge or whether it's closer in. And the arborist gives us the certain protection measures that we need to abide by in order to not damage the tree.
Great, thank you, Robin. And then one quick question for the tree removal section, and then we'll move forward with the rest of the presentation. Is there any tree that will be relocated rather than it being removed?
I don't believe at this time we have any plans for trees to be relocated. I believe it's either removal replacement and or it's going to be protect in place. There's no removal and relocate at this time.
Great, thank you, Robin. I think we can go ahead and move on to the next section.
All right, so just talking through a little bit of our holiday work schedule for you guys. So we have some key dates that I want to point out. We will not be working on Christmas Day. We also will not be working on New Year's Day, and we will not be working on the Sundays after Christmas or after New Year's Eve, or after New Year's Day. We are also tentatively not planning on working the 23rd and 24th of December, so New Year's Eve or Christmas Day, I'm sorry, buggered that one up again. Christmas Eve, 24th, and Christmas Eve, the 23rd. We are tentatively not planning on working those days, but we do have those kind of as a placeholder in case some of our pile driving schedule has some issues. Again, like I talked about with our pile driving and foundations, we've been running into some challenges with that. So we're just working through those, and we have a little bit of placeholder in our schedule on the 23rd and 24th. So I haven't put that on our slides, but we are hoping and planning to not work on the 23rd and 24th to give our crews a break on those days. So those are our current holiday schedule plans, just so you guys know. All right. And then I want to talk through some nearby construction projects just to give you guys a heads up on what our coordination is with SDOT. So for those of you who are in and around the Boyer Avenue area, You guys know that SDOT has been starting some work and going through improvements on their curb, ramp, and sidewalk improvements and construction. They started their work in November, kind of on that 11th Avenue and East Edgar Street area and intersections. They're also continuing some work down on Boyer Avenue. Just as a note, we have some communication there for Matt Howard if you guys want to reach out for any particular questions. But I do want to note that we're actively working with these folks to make sure that our construction, once we get out in February for tree clearing operations and utility relocations, doesn't overlap with any of their traffic operations, because we don't want to conflict and make traffic confusing. We don't want to make operations any more confusing than they could be, because personally I've run into that before and it can be a challenge. So we're making sure we're actively staying in communication with those folks, sharing our schedule. So yeah, we wanted to share that with you guys. And if you guys do have any questions for those folks that you want to share with us, please feel free to do so, and we can pass that along as well. All right, and then just a little bit more detail on our upcoming work. So on the utilities that I mentioned with our tree clearing, on the Boyer hillside that we are going to get into tree clearing and vegetation removal for April of next year, we are getting into some utility relocation for Seattle City Light and Seattle Public Utilities. Our major work is scheduled to be in August 2025, but we do have some minor work scheduled for that April-May timeframe. Part of that is going to include some traffic impacts on Boyer Ave, hence our coordination with SDOT and East Roanoke Street. And then another part of that is going to include the Boyer stair closure, which is that stairway closure adjacent to the hillside. And again, that's just an adjustment to our schedule with tree clearing, so that we can kind of align it with our construction elements and just make sure we're aligning it with our utility schedule. Okay. Touching on another subject is mitigating all of our construction noise. Part of our project is to install acoustic fence in certain areas to mitigate construction noise, particularly in sensitive areas where we're going to have a lot of activity very close to some neighborhoods. Starting in February of next year, we'll also be installing acoustic fence in these key areas around the project. On the screen here, you can see that black fence with the fabric on it. The black fabric is our acoustic fence, and that's what we will be installing February through early spring of next year. And that helps with dampening the sound. This is a map of what that looks like. So in the green lines that you can see on the screen, those are the areas that we'll be installing the fence. Those will start on our Portage Bay bridges in February, depending on where we're at in our construction process. So on both the east and west sides. And then we'll have February, March on the north side of our lid area, and March, April on the south side of our lid area. We'll get started on the installation of that fence. Touching base on the Bill Dawson trail closures. So I mentioned earlier with our tree and vegetation schedule that will be starting in February on the east side of the project in that Montlake area. Part of that will be a little bit of short-term closures for Bill Dawson Trail. Those short-term closures will be very periodic, maybe a couple days, weekends, just for us to clear some larger trees, just for safety purposes, or it might be periodic closures like 15 or less minutes to cross some equipment or personnel materials during the day. So very short-term closures during that period of time. But eventually we will have a long-term Bill Dawson Trail closure We're working on our schedule and finalizing that date for probably middle to fall, summer to fall of 2025, and that will be a 5-year closure of the Bill Dawson Trail. That is a long-term closure, and we're working through our finalization of the detours. So we have some potential detours that you can see on the screen right here in the blue and the reddish orange right there. We do have the existing routes shown in the yellow and orange, and then what we're planning is to detour folks via the Montlake Boulevard or Montlake Place east and down to West Montlake Place with the option of going over to the east a little bit. So we are working through a little bit more of that development. These aren't officially finalized. We're working with Seattle Parks and SDOT to finalize these detours and make sure they are effective. We are interested in your feedback. If you guys do utilize these areas for your own walking and running and biking experiences, we are interested in your feedback and welcome it. If you guys want to send us an email to give us feedback, I would certainly appreciate it and can pass it along to our team. All right, and just again, a note on that, we are closing, I apologize, had a pop-up on my computer, there we go. We are closing as early as spring 2025, but more likely the summer of 2025 was kind of our pre-clearing operations. We have our 5-year scheduled closure of the Bill Dawson Trail. That detour will again go around that closure. The activities that we have planned for that and kind of why we're closing that trail is because it's really safety of you guys and then our own personnel. We are going to be bringing our work trestles through that area, so we have to build that infrastructure directly across the trail. We also have to build the new infrastructure, which is a lot of hazardous heavy material going across the trail. And we're going to have to remove the existing bridge, which is going to be removing a lot of very heavy material with our cranes and heavy equipment. So it's a major safety thing that we just want to make sure we're not interfacing with people and cars and other bicycles, that the interface of the Bill Dawson Trail is most effective if we close it and ensure the safety of everybody. All right, so planning some upcoming activities. And I'll run through this just briefly so I can make sure we have time for folks' questions. Something that I've touched on past meetings and will continue to touch on as we get into next year is the development of our lid detour and access. We are going to have a temporary detour during our lid construction because in order to build the new Roanoke lid, we are going to have to remove the existing 10th and Delmar bridges. During that removal, we are going to build a temporary overpass, what you see in blue, so that we can maintain traffic at all times, aside for some brief weekend closures to flip-flop traffic. So during those closures, we would close off, remove that, build parts of the lid, traffic would be maintained. And I do want to note that that is some new traffic on the Federal Avenue side. So it would be pretty busy, and it's a new level of traffic on that south side of the lid area. So we are working to start that process in 2026. That construction would get started once we get through the design progress. The detour itself and the overpass opening would not start till mid-2027, and the swap back to 10th and Delmar would be at the end of 2029. The other part that we're working through is the pedestrian and biker access over that overpass. We are still through the early stages of design, so that's why it's kind of an open topic here. And we'll continue to talk about it as we develop this design. we're working through those potential detour routes to make sure we maintain that safety for users, bikers, cars, and pedestrians, to maintain adequate crossings in all directions. And we're working with SDOT, parks, everybody to make sure that it's designed adequately. There's certain constraints we do have with the limits of that overpass and the width, but we are going to keep you guys updated as we get more details through that design. And just a couple little notes on that. So with our preliminary design, we do already have some of our sidewalk and bike connections, our crosswalks, and we do have our travel lanes, temporary signals, and detour signs. Some of that information is figured out, and we'll continue to work through those details. But the challenges that we're working through now are the actual widths of those lanes, the types of bike lanes, whether they're separated or integrated with the road lanes, the actual signal timing and how that looks, and then the general enhancement of safety for all the travelers. All right, so staying in touch and Q&A. And how to stay informed, Alan, I will hand it back to you to run through this and open this up for Q&A. And I just want to say thank you to everybody again for listening to me. We do have some time left for questions once Alan runs through our how to stay informed, but I will stay on the line as long as we want to run through those questions, and then we will follow up with anybody whose questions we aren't able to answer in this meeting. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robin, for walking us through the presentation. We have about 10 minutes left in our formal meeting, but I have a couple of quick slides to go through, and then we'll go into the rest of the Q&A. I see that we have 3 questions in the queue. As I'm speaking, definitely feel free to submit your any additional questions that may have come up throughout the presentation. And then with the slide that's in front of you right now, just wanting to remind you folks that there are several different ways to stay in contact with us. We have our 24/7 Portage Bay Construction Hotline, the number right here. We try to make it easy for you folks to remember 206-319-4520 in case anybody caught that. We also have our Construction Corner website at sr520construction.com. We send out regular email updates, and then we also have our project inbox as well. If you're signed up for our email updates, again, you'll be notified of when we have our future public meetings. We have been experimenting with a noon time. We're open to hearing feedback if this time has worked for folks, if they would prefer evening meetings. We're happy to listen to any feedback that you folks may have regarding these meetings themselves. But yeah, if you sign up for email updates, we'll make sure to stay in contact with you folks. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, and thank you everybody. We do have it just changed. We have 8 minutes left for the Q&A, but of course we'll stay on if any additional questions come through. For a couple of the questions here, I can take on this first question from Greg, is regarding the Beaver Lodge. So apologies, my written response may have gotten lost in the chat, but Greg's original question was regarding the Beaver Lodge. It's in Portage Bay. What are the current plans for working around it? What are the plans for being in that area? We do have a frequently asked questions document on the Construction Corner on sr520construction.com that should address most of your questions regarding the Beaver Lodge. As you folks are reviewing the FAQ and additional questions come up, please go ahead and send us an email and we'll make sure to follow up with you. And then for a couple of other questions here, we have a question from Pete. What is the criteria for obtaining a hotel voucher as construction nears residences?
Yeah, that's a good question. So typically the criteria for obtaining a hotel voucher is under our temporary noise variance. And that's something I can probably coordinate with you, Alan, to get a little bit more detail on, maybe in like a written response, because it does have some more details and the difference between our noise variance for our project versus our temporary noise variances for nighttime construction. So we plan to do most of our work during the day, but certainly there's going to be some work at nighttime. And if we are entering that scenario where we have work at night, there may be a scenario where we have a temporary noise variance that we have to apply for. If we do apply for that, it'll be through the City of Seattle. And once we're granted, if we're granted that temporary noise variance, we publish out to impacted folks for that construction in a certain area. So I given an example, potentially the Boyer Hillside, for example. If we're working in the Boyer Hillside, we would reach out to neighbors within, I'd say 300 or 500 foot radius, and we would give them the opportunity to have that hotel voucher for that noise impact. And they can reach out to us if they are interested in having that hotel voucher during that period of noisy construction during night. So it's something that we can reach out to you guys for. There's also opportunity if you're experiencing that at night that you can call our hotline and let us know, and we can talk to you guys and communicate with you and figure out those challenges during those operations.
Great, thank you, Robin. And then as a quick add-on for that as well, in terms of how folks are going to be notified, we have two main methods. For folks who fall within our notification area, we will, every single residents in that area will be receiving a flyer for the next couple of months at least. That is going to be our approach. We'll post flyers on front doors for the folks who are eligible for a hotel voucher. Moving forward, we may move over to email, just pending some of the contact information that we're able to obtain from neighbors. So if you are living near a construction area and we don't have your contact information on file, feel free to give us a call or send an email over to us, and we'll make sure to add you to our email list. We have 4 minutes left, and we have 2 questions that are still in the queue. The first one is regarding the closure of the Roanoke Stairs. What is the alternative route for pedestrians who currently use the Roanoke Stairs, and what is it going to be, or what's the route going to be, and why are the stairs being closed in the first place?
Yeah, so great question. And thank you, Dakota. We have up here an example concept design for what we're going to be constructing in that area. So the alternate route, we don't have a formal alternate route for the stairs at this time, though the alternate route will be essentially the block going around the stairs on the local streets using sidewalks. How are we accommodating those who walk around the neighborhood when you close important walking, biking routes? I would say outside of the stairs are an exception to having a formal route or not having a formal route. Every other walk and biking route will have a formal detour that we design and get approved through WashDOT and the City of Seattle. All of those will be signed with detour routes, and we try to minimize the distance as much as we possibly can while maintaining something that is safe, effective, and ADA compliant and gives people access to the places that they want to be going. And then the last part of that was, why are we closing pedestrian paths for multiple years? For the Roanoke Stairs in particular, it's a combination of multiple activities. So we're starting with utility relocations and really the preceding and following activities with walls, structures to build the bridge, and following on eventually to build these new stairs that you see on the screen here is going to take that full 5 years. It's just and I hate this, I always hate this phrase, it's our process of construction, but those activities and that sequence of construction will take those 5 years of time. Similar to the Bill Dawson Trail, the construction sequence and activities are going to take that full 5 years of time. And in order to do that safely, give it the good quality that we want to provide you guys at the end of the day and provide it back to you guys, that's going to take that full time.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin. We have one question left and 1 minute remaining in our formal meeting time. What feedback is meaningful with the Bill Dawson Trail? Previously, Kara has shared feedback and the answer has been, this is a plan. Sorry, it's disruptive. We can't change it. How can we actually engage in a discussion? I can touch on that just a little bit. So this Saturday, during the Montlake Bike the Bridge event, members of the Skanska Portage Bay team will be out near the area collecting feedback from folks. As you may have seen from the map that we had shared earlier, we do have 2 potential alternate routes during the trail closure, and we are open to having discussions with anybody trying to figure out any sort of feedback that they may have regarding those detours, whether it is the existing conditions of those streets, or maybe it's the grade of those streets, or maybe it's just those streets might not work for some folks. So we are open to hearing any and all feedback. If you folks aren't able to make it to the Bike the Bridge event this Saturday, you can reach us via our project hotline or our project inbox as well. Robin, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would say just the type of feedback that was meaningful. Exactly what you said, Alan. Street conditions, certain streets that we should and shouldn't avoid. I can't say from our standpoint that we can promise things from the feedback, but we do want the feedback from the community, because at the end of the day, you guys are the users of those detours. We want to be able to incorporate your feedback as much as possible. And having your feedback is what we can take to the table in our designs. And we can have those conversations with WashDOT, with the City of Seattle, with our own teams. So emails, coming to the Bike to Bridge event, pop-ups, anything like that, and having those conversations, that would be meaningful.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin. There are no additional questions left in the queue, and we are a minute over. If folks have any additional questions that they would like to ask us, feel free to send us an email or, again, give us a call. As a reminder, we'll be posting today's meeting materials on both our project website and the construction corner. Can we move forward to the slide that shows where the recordings are located? On the project website, please make sure you click on the related links tab, and on the construction also be receiving emails from me in the future about future meetings soon. And I hope you all take care and happy holidays. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.